Hey, to whoever may need this nugget of encouragement, things will be alright, so quit your worrying. I get it, the odds seem stacked back against the wall, but even consider it such, know you'll stand tall. Sat and watched from the sidelines one too many times. Wicked games to play, make me wanna lose my mind. Found solitude, knowing it'll be over soon. Ever need a boost, count on me.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Wage Breakers podcast. Today we have something special and a little bit different. I'm going to be the person who's being interviewed by a good friend of mine, Jackson Mullins. If you guys are in college or have been through college, you know that professors will make you branch out and try new things. And for him, his was do a podcast. And he decided to interview me about my podcast and bring a couple questions and statistics and things like that to get a greater understanding. So I actually really enjoyed this interview, and I think it's got some valuable content in it, and I'd like to share it with you guys. Thanks.
Good day, and welcome to our Communications Class podcast. Today, we will be discussing podcasts. I chose to discuss podcasts because I find them an interesting media source. They seem untraditional and to be on the fringe of media. Podcasts seem to, in part, imitate the radio of yesteryear. Podcasts are an ever-growing media, finding much success in their streaming ability. Media convergence has allowed for more and more content to be streamed. Therefore, podcasts have many competitors. The most significant and comparable of these competitors seem to be music and audiobooks. These are the types of media that people would generally listen to at the same time they might choose to listen to a podcast. Therefore, podcasts need to provide value for the listener. Today, we will be interviewing Alex Nielsen. Alex is from Holiday, Utah. He attended Olympus High School and is currently a student at Utah Valley University. He is currently studying computer science. He hopes to become successful and rich. How he plans on doing this still remains to be seen. In addition to being a student, Alex is a good friend of mine who just so happens to run his own podcast, Wage Breakers. From their own description, quote, Wage Breakers is a lighthearted yet insightful podcast exploring the pathways to success beyond the traditional hourly wage, close quote. Alex often meets with successful businessmen, athletes, and influencers to gain insights on what young people can be doing now to prepare themselves for success in a struggling economy. Wage Breakers is the perfect podcast to listen to if you are interested in learning more about how you can become economically free. Today, we will be discussing his podcast, Wage Breakers, how Wage Breakers is seeing success and its influence on others. We also will discuss demographics of those who primarily listen to podcasts, how Alex is able to target those listeners, and why some people are more likely to listen to and trust podcasts over others. We hope to gain insights on how to be more media literate, how we can engage with media, and the process necessary for the development of a podcast. We are excited to be with Alex today and to learn from him. We are thankful for Alex, for his time, and for his willingness to help us today. Alex, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jackson, for letting me do this with you.
So today we just wanted to kind of go over some questions like we talked about in the intro and also in those questions that I previously sent to you. And so we wanted to talk a lot about your podcast, Wage Breakers, all right? And so the first question that we kind of have for you is, who exactly is your target demographic?
Yeah, so this is actually kind of funny. We started Wage Breakers because we wanted to be successful. Me and my roommate and best friend, Morgan Hyatt, we started it together on saying, like, I want to be successful, but I have no idea how. And so we said, well, we're just going to let the people who are like us tag along for the ride. You know, people can learn with us. So it is targeted to more entrepreneurs, people who are entrepreneurs or have that fire, like, I want to do something, I want to build my own company one day and haven't started, or people who are getting started, but they're just not entirely sure how to go about it just yet.
Okay, so I like that word, wantrapreneur. All right, can you maybe expand a little bit on what that is?
I think I heard that for the first time yesterday. I
Okay.
was trying to explain this concept to other people, and it just didn't feel right. Entrepreneur is just someone that pretty much wants to be an entrepreneur one day, but isn't actively acting on it currently. So if you're studying, you say, oh, I'm going to be a mechanical engineer, or I'm studying to be a mechanical engineer, and I really want to build my own something one day. I really want to build my own company. And that's something where you go, all right, he's not actively being an entrepreneur. I don't think he could necessarily call himself that yet. But if he's got this thought, he's like, oh, I love business and I want to be an entrepreneur one day. That's kind of where entrepreneur comes in.
Okay, so it's kind of like someone who's not yet at a stage where they can fully be an entrepreneur, but is still learning how to develop those skills so they one day can be a entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think what we want to do is we want to encourage more people who are in that entrepreneur stage to become entrepreneurs now.
Okay.
And that's something that we think, oh, maybe I'm not in this stage right now. Maybe I have to wait for a degree or more experience or more money. And honestly, I think now is always the best time to do something. Whatever stage of life you're in right now, it'll never get easier than right now. Think about me in college.
Right.
I'm just paying for myself. I have hardly any expenses, just rent and food and tuition, right? That's about it. Other than those three things, I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. This is the best time to take risks, to start something, be creative, and gain all this experience. So I think maybe 5 years down the line, it would be way harder for me to start a podcast and not make any money while doing it and put my whole heart and soul into it.
Because you would have other obligations other than just yourself.
Correct.
Right? You couldn't be as selfless. All right, and so we've talked a little bit about these entrepreneurs, and these are the people that your podcast is specifically trying to get to. And so I guess my next question would be, how do you target that demographic?
For the most part, it's with the content. So it's pretty hard to target specific people. I can't send my podcast to people because you can't really tell their interests more than anything. Like deep down inside, I can't go and talk with everyone and then everyone I just hand them my podcast.
Right.
So mostly it's to create good content and use social media, use different platforms to just get it in front of them and maybe tie my thing to possible other content or media that they are absorbing. So on Instagram, you try to target maybe the inspirational or success or self-motivation or self-improvement sections.
Okay.
And that will get my podcast, my media in front of them so that they can have the option to know about it and check it out and listen to it.
Okay, awesome. I really like what you said because it applies perfectly to something that we've discussed in my communications class, right? And you said as part of you targeting your demographic, you go to places that they might see your content. You use you primarily said like social media and Instagram, and so that applies to a term in our social media class, which we've called convergence. How there's a lot of different media content coming into one place, and as we talked about in our introduction, right, as a podcast, you're not only competing with other podcasts, but you're also competing with audiobooks and primarily music, right? Because if I'm going in to stream a podcast, I'm probably at a other place where it's just as easy for me to stream music or an audiobook, whereas it might be harder for me to
find a podcast.
Or it might be harder for me to stream like a TV show rather than music or they're all kind of on the same level.
So what you're really actually competing for is you're not competing against these things. You're competing for people's attention. Okay. And everyone has different ways to do it. So with a podcast, it's someone's attention that you're trying to get. with either stories, with information, with knowledge, with whatever you're trying to sell, with humor. The same thing with music. You're selling a feeling, right?
Okay.
You're trying to capture their attention with the feelings that you get, or with an audiobook, same way. So the best way to think about this is not think about, I'm competing with Billie Eilish over here making music.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm competing with the feeling that people get when they listen to my stuff. I'm competing for their attention.
Okay, so you're not necessarily competing against other forms of media. You're maybe competing for people's attention instead.
And that's with social media as well.
Okay.
So social media, the thing is this is more passive. So like you said, audiobooks and music are probably the other two biggest passive ones.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you can't walk around all the time with a phone and watching a TV show.
You can't drive and watch TV.
Exactly.
You can drive and listen to a podcast.
Yeah. So it is true. It's just there's the different, like the more active attention, maybe in school, maybe your phone, movies, TV shows, and then there's the passive attention, which is you listening, or where you can multitask, do the dishes, drive, fold your laundry, go to the gym.
Walk.
Yep. So all these things that you can do other things while doing it, it's more passive, and that's where we jump in with podcasts.
Okay, awesome. In doing a little bit of research for our meeting today, I read a Pew Research article which was entitled "Podcasts as a Source of News and Information." And this podcast talked a little bit about how only 31% of podcast listeners tune in to learn about money and finance. And of course, your podcast is primarily about money and finance.
Yeah.
And so, as a podcast that specifically targets this group, how do you plan on getting more listeners that are comprising this niche group?
I think if you looked around at other niches, you would see something similar.
Okay.
I think if you said, how many people are looking at podcasts for humor? And you would say, oh, maybe only like 10%.
12%.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So I'd say honestly, like money and finance is a bigger portion.
Okay.
And I would say that we don't necessarily talk a whole lot about money and finance. We talk more about, habits and mentality and things like that, because we aren't super skilled with money yet. We don't have a whole lot of money. We don't have a ton of experience with that. But we want to learn. So if someone's going to come in and help us learn more about money, and we interview them and talk to them about it, then yes, it's something more about that. But for the most part, I think with any niche, you're just going to have to just target your specific niche, right? I can't target all of podcast listeners.
Right.
That would be ridiculous, because like how would I get it in front of everyone? Like someone likes to listen to the news, and someone likes to listen to, strictly sports, and someone likes to listen to comedy or money and finance. So I do think money and finance is actually a huge market inside the podcast field.
Really? Okay, that's awesome. And what you've said is kind of, again, it relates exactly to what we've talked about in my communications class. You talked about how you can't get your podcast in front of everyone. That'd be unrealistic. And all of these different podcasts are targeting different groups of people. And that's something that we've talked about in our class as specialization. And so you specialize to your specific audience in a hope that those people will be more attracted to you than, say, to sports, right? Because you specialized to their interests, which is awesome. And I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned that you hope to inspire, or your podcast talks a lot about habits and what you can be doing on a daily basis to, find joy and success. And from that same Pew Research article, it says 36% of podcast listeners have made or tried a lifestyle change from listening to a podcast. And so I wanted to ask you, do you think that your podcast, Wage Breakers, affects people's actions? And if so, how is it affecting people's actions?
Yeah, great question. I actually really like this. I like the statistics that you're bringing, because it actually helps me a lot more, know, oh, there's actually people who are changing their habits because of it. And Wage Breakers is primarily made to help change our habits, mostly because me and Morgan, we want to change and we want to be better, and we go, all right, if we're going to do this, what is the point of just like telling people like, yes, this is what habits do, right? And not encourage them to do the same. So our whole goal is to go and get actionable advice and actionable steps to implement things in our lives.
Okay.
So whenever we talk to successful people, we go, all right, what is something that young people should do today to, get a leg up or to, on their career? And they say networking. It's like, okay, guys, we're going to go networking, right?
Okay.
And that's something that's been a huge benefit in our life. Like, I know that we've been implementing the stuff that we've talked about in the podcast, and we've seen a lot of change. We have a little series called Book Club where we read a book. Right now it's Atomic Habits, and we break it down. And that is solely focused on change, where we encourage, okay, guys, yeah, like this is what we need to do to change. These are the steps of habit building and all this kind of stuff. So we actually really encourage people to change when listening to our podcast. And I really hope that people are, because I've seen a change in myself, and it's awesome. Like, I'm seeing little small changes every single time that we do something, and it gives me a lot more confidence that I have a lot more power over my life than say I used to.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to hoping to change other lives, your own podcast, Wage Breakers, is changing yours. What are some of those changes? You talked about networking. Can you be a little bit more specific about some of those changes that you've seen within your own life?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to share 3. One of them first starts off with discipline. Mm-hmm. My ability to be more disciplined and, realize what's going on in my own head and then flip that for my benefit has been super beneficial. It's been super apparent in my life. So talking about habits and how they're formed, I start to be more self-aware, and that allows me to notice, hey, I'm doing this out of fear. I'm doing this out of stress. I'm doing this out of whatever emotion, right? And it allows me to flip it to my benefit, right? And just by doing that, and that's been one of the biggest benefits, is this self-discipline. Number 2 is networking.
Okay.
So before I started this, I knew a handful of people that probably could have helped me in my journey, whatever, to success and money and riches, whatever, whatever my goals were. But now just contacting the first person that we had on our podcast, Sean Bear, awesome guy. And afterwards he said, do you know anyone else who would like to be on the podcast? He's like, let me know who you want. Let me open some doors. Let me introduce you. And we did that, and he introduced us to someone else named Sean Finnegan. Okay. And Sean Finnegan has just exploded our whole world with the amount of people he's led into our lives. And now we have a myriad of mentors, people that we could message, other contacts that will set us up with other people, and a whole lot more experiences as well, people who we never thought we'd talk to. So we talked with Bronson Kafusi, who was an NFL athlete, and that's just by being around these other guys who have this network. And now, like, I never thought that I would be able to just like walk up to an NFL athlete and be like, hey guy, like, what's up? And be on a first name basis,
That's awesome.
And so it's super sweet. This whole thing is super sweet, and that's mentoring. Sorry, not mentoring, networking.
Networking.
Yep. I think the third one is probably what I've learned just by doing the podcast itself.
Okay.
Which is like, you need to just start, it doesn't have to be perfect. I think all the stuff that goes wrong with the podcast all the time, like, there's always something that goes wrong, and it's super annoying. And it's like, you plan for one thing, something goes wrong over here, and you're like, okay, now I've taken care of this thing as well. Then something goes wrong over here, right? And it's always just me being more positive about what's going on, being like, all right, there's always going to be little failures. There's always going to be stuff that goes wrong, and just kind of enjoying the journey.
Yeah.
So those are some of the biggest things that I've learned while doing the podcast, some of the biggest changes that I've seen just in my own life by doing this the past 8 months.
8 months. And I'd like to mention, like, I've seen some of those changes in you. For those of you listening, me and Alex used to be roommates. In fact, that's how we met. who's an awesome roommate, by the way.
I always cleaned up.
Always cleaned up.
I always did the dishes.
He always did the dishes.
I was always sweeping, just mopping, wiping down the baseboards.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like I was the best roommate.
Yeah, you were the best roommate. And Morgan was equally as good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when he was there.
When he was there. Oh, that's hilarious. But I mean, I remember, you know, when, I mean, I don't mean to be offensive, but you were a little bit lazy when I first met you.
Yeah, dude, I was. I couldn't get out of the house.
Yeah, you would never get out of the house. You'd spend all day, you know, watching TV or something. I'd leave, come back. You'd be watching another movie. I'd sit down and watch a movie with you. And now I've seen, like, from this, I remember when you first started getting really serious about this podcast and how you'd go and you'd start working on it and you'd sit down for hours in working on it and you'd have microphone issues and stuff like that, and you just sit down and get it done. And I thought that was, like, super admirable. And then I remember, like, or even now, just the change that I've seen. You're constantly doing something to be productive. I mean, of course, we're not roommates anymore, so I don't see you nearly as much. But anytime I call you out, you're always like, yeah, I'm at iHub, man, working on this, that, or the other. Like, you're no longer in the house. And I think that that's just such a, like, admirable trait of how you've been able to kind of have that. I mean, just in the time that I've known you, have that, like, 180 switch of always being in the apartment and watching TV and being, like, unproductive, to now always you're on your feet doing something. I call you, you say, yeah, I can block out this time, and then after this time I have to get back to work on this. And I think that that's just an incredible thing. And you've talked about this this networking that you've had with other individuals, and I think that that is, you know, quite incredible that you've been able to meet people that could potentially change the entire course of your life, right? I mean, a lot of times it's said it's not what you know, it's
who you know.
It's who you know. And I wanted to ask a little bit about commercialization of your content. All right, because you're getting these influencers, you're getting these, you know, quote unquote powerful people, right? So obviously you're gonna have some influence, right? And 60%, again, that same Pew Research article, it was a wonderful article. It had a lot of great statistics.
I only had to go to one article.
I only had to go to one article.
I got everything I needed in one article. It was written for me. I felt like it had my name on it.
It said, Jackson, read this. Okay, so it says, that Pew Research article says 60% of podcast listeners have watched a movie, read a book, or listened to music due to a podcast. So in essence, this opens the door for commercialized content, whether that be product sponsorships, product placement, whether, you know, whatever the case may be. Where do you see, you know, a spot for commercialization within Wage Breakers, or is there not a spot for that at all?
So what I see, let me tell you what I see going on in podcasting right now is everyone wants their own podcast, but they want it for their own business. Like, they have their own business and they want to have a podcast, like a little supplement thing for it. And I think that's cool, all good, whatever. What we're doing is we're doing it backwards. We're doing, like, podcast first and move into business.
Okay.
And so more than anything, Wage Breakers is not just a podcast, it's more of an idea, which is, you know, help these entrepreneurs and young entrepreneurs, you know, start to design their own life, take control of their own habits and their own mindset and their own ability so that they can achieve their dreams. And that idea is bigger than just a podcast or what we're talking about or the people we meet with, right? And that allows for a lot bigger, like, commercialization, right? Maybe you sell a course. Maybe you have a product, something that these people might want or something that's super valuable. Or maybe we go and we teach how to make podcasts, right? There's a ton of stuff. I mean, there's sponsorships, there's all these kind of whatnot, and then there's social media on top of it, right? So you go and you gain a social media following, and you're able to, you know, have these same things, sponsorships, or you have other commercialization options when it comes to social media as well. But it is because you're gaining an audience more than you're just gaining like a bigger podcast.
Okay. So you view it more as you're gaining that audience, and then maybe one day you'll be able to sell a product to them.
Here's something that's super awesome. Whenever you build a business, like you build the business and you build the product, and then you're like, I believe in this product, right? Now I have to go and convince everyone else to believe in it, right? But they don't know you. They don't know who you are. They don't trust you, whatever, you know? And so you have to now convey that every time you try to sell your product, right? Now, if you build an audience, right? And you say, hey, guys, this helped me a lot. This course, like this is all we've learned while building this. And they say, I know you. I've listened to you for a year. I trust you. I feel like you have integrity. I like this product. I want to know what you know, this kind of stuff. Now they're automatically more inclined to trust you, and that's why so many people have like read books or watched movies or whatever based on podcasts, because they listen to them and they feel that they can get their personality in a sincere way.
Or it's like why Oprah Winfrey can sell a book.
Exactly.
Because people watched her TV
show, right? Like,
yeah, she gains that kind of trust, and so you're kind of hoping to do that.
You're like, oh yeah, I know Oprah. It's like, you've never met Oprah, but you feel like you know Oprah, and you feel like you trust Oprah. And so it's the same way where you build a product, and people automatically, I guess your audience automatically is more inclined to, you know, support your endeavors just due to the fact that they already know you, or at least they feel like they know you.
Interesting. This is kind of a side topic, but many podcasts help listeners keep up with current events. Does yours?
No, not really. I would say we haven't really talked about current events very much. I think it's pretty hard to not get political or religious and all this kind of stuff whenever or get on controversial topics. Stuff that doesn't really concern the podcast in a way. I know that people would say, oh, well, success and business and finance and all this kind of stuff. What about the economy? Why don't we talk about that? And I think the principles to success, more than just like a step-to-step guide, are going to be the same no matter what.
So the principles to success are the same regardless of how the economy is functioning.
Exactly.
But of course, you know, the economy will affect.
Yes. It'll affect your decisions. It'll affect how your business runs. But the principles, right? Consistency, discipline, right? All these kind of things that you will not be successful if you do not develop the certain soft skills needed. Whereas, like, if I gave you a step-to-step guide on how to build a successful business in this economy, and you didn't have the discipline or the consistency or the motivation or whatever to fulfill it, then there's no way. Like that, it's worthless. Okay. Whereas if I gave you the soft skills necessary to be successful in life,
to be motivated, to have that discipline, okay.
Yep, to have control over your own habits, to have happy relationships, to network, it doesn't matter what's going on, because there's going to be people who become successful in this economy, in a better economy, in a worse economy, and you just got to be able to develop all the skills necessary to do that in whatever stage of life you're in.
So you would maybe argue that those soft skills are a little bit more important than those hard skills.
Well, hard skills are like computer science, or, you know, soft skills is more. Yeah, I would honestly argue that soft skills are
more like transferable in a way.
Yeah, I'd say it doesn't matter what's going on in the world, you can use them every single day, and I'd say they are much more important than hard skills.
Awesome. And one thing I'd like to mention is, like, over the course of knowing you, I've watched you develop some of those soft skills. So again, super, super admirable of you. And then one last question I want to ask is from that same Pew Research article.
Yes, we love that.
Research.
We love that one.
48% of young podcast listeners report listening to podcasts more than once a week. How often are you releasing content for these listeners? And how do you interact and engage with your listeners? It's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah. Twice a week. We try to have one interview and one with me and Morgan talking, whether that's book club or analyzing an article or whatever.
So you vary that content.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just, depending on what people like, what they gravitate to. We've been doing it consistently enough. We've been starting to do that recently. Okay. So I don't think we have a large enough data set to really tell if that's really working. We've also started doing a lot more social media. And so that's how we mostly engage with our users or our listeners.
It's through that social media.
It's through social media, trying to send out podcast clips, get people to be more interested in listening to it. And also they're, welcome to comment or whatever, on all that stuff.
Awesome. And speaking of you engaging with your listeners and interacting with them, how have you seen your podcast grow over the past few months?
So the podcast, in terms of listeners, it's a lot more consistent. So normally we would get spikes, and it would usually be because of me and Morgan being all like, hey guys, friends and family, go listen, whatever. So we're getting a lot more people who are consistent.
Okay.
Meeting someone who is a listener of our podcast is really rare, rather because the friends and family, it's not targeted towards them. So they've all dropped off.
Yeah.
And now we're gaining like actual people who want to listen to the podcast itself. They're here for the content. They're here for us. Rather than, kind of pity listens is what I like to call them. And it's okay. I mean, pity listens, they look nice on a graph, but they don't really help you, right? Mm-hmm. So we have seen it grow. We've seen our social media accounts grow. And it's fun. It's hard. It's something that we've never done before. And we're still trying every day to do something a little bit different to maximize what we're doing. And so I'm super excited to see what happens in the future.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time. We're so happy that we've been able to talk about this with you. We've learned a lot. And we have. Go give Wage Breakers a listen. It's an awesome podcast. You'll learn a lot. If you apply what it has to teach, you're gonna learn. I can tell you that.
Jackson, are you gonna listen?
I will listen to Wage Breakers.
You don't have to listen to all of it. There's 23 episodes right now.
That's a pity listen right there.
That's a pity listen. We don't want Jackson's pity listen.
Just kidding. But go give Wage Breakers a listen. It's a good podcast. It'll teach you, as we've talked about, some of those soft skills, so you can be successful in any economy. But we've also learned a lot about that media literacy, how you're engaging with your listeners, how you're using the different platforms to engage with those listeners, and how you're specialized in your content. And so we've learned a lot from you today, and we're so grateful for the time that we've been able to spend with you. And thank you very much, Alex.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, to whoever may need this nugget of encouragement, things will be alright, so quit your worry. I get it, the odds seem stacked back against the wall, but even consider it such, no, you'll stand tall. Sat and watch from the sidelines one too many times. Wicked games we play make me wanna lose my mind.